Hello there, this is Sohail Hasni, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Hydrogen is an interesting technology. Many people are super excited about them. I am still not one of them. Last month, I had the opportunity to bring Mathieu Geze as a guest to this platform to discuss a live project. I mean, he may be the first person I spoke who's actually managing an investment project in hydrogen. He shares his different ideas of working in Indonesia and many other places and the challenges he's facing, the technological challenges, the financial challenges, bring the cost down, make hydrogen viable. Because if you look at the forecast of International Energy Agency and others, hydrogen is still considered as a key building block to deliver net zero for everyone. So please join in.
Hi, good morning, Matthew. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Right now, I'm in Manila. Maybe before we get into the details, if you could please introduce yourself. I know you have a wide array of experience.
Thank you for the invitation to discuss today. My name is Mathieu. I'm based in Indonesia since 3 years. I'm director for Asia at HDF Energy. I've been working at HDF 6 years almost. But I've been working in renewable energies all my career, either for developers, EPCs, module manufacturer, or technology provider. And now I'm based in Indonesia to accelerate our development in the whole Asia region.
Wow. So you said module manufacturing to project development, like a whole gamut, right?
Yeah, in the experiences, I started in a company who was a project developer, EPC, module manufacturer. It was in a time in Europe where the PV industry was starting. For example, 10 megawatt was a massive project. We saw players which were quite integrated in their position. And as you may know, they were stop and go in the industry as most of the sector was dependent of feed-in tariffs. So from 2009 to 2012, I was working in a company who were fully integrated from development, construction, supply of technologies through the modules. In 2012, I joined a company who was working in the supply of tracker and engineering services. I was based in Bordeaux and Bordeaux in France. And in 2018, I joined HDF Energy.
You said those days when 10 megawatt used to be big. So what is big now?
What is big now? The answer will depend on the country of the company also. Whether you are HDF or Total, the perception of big might be different. I don't know if I need to disclose a figure. I would say above 200 megawatt becomes big, but really it's driven, of course, in the context.
So 200 megawatt is reasonably big still considered.
Yes, but again, if you are in Middle East, I'm not sure 200 megawatts would be considered big. There are a lot of land, a lot of sun, a lot of money also available to invest and competitive. So maybe their big would be more like 1 gigawatt. But it's really driven by the country and the player who is leading the development.
Oh, absolutely. Also, the world has changed, right? When you said old days 10 megawatt, that 10 megawatt was like a $20-30 million project, right? Now 500 megawatt, maybe $300 million project, no?
Yeah. The cost of PV decreased massively. It became a commodity. Hence, the perception needs change also. It's positive about the potential that we have in hydrogen. If we follow the same kind of curves that we saw in PV and wind, the potentials for price optimization are amazing.
Okay, before we get into hydrogen, because that itself is a huge topic, you recently attended Future of Energy. You must have a very strong view on how the future of energy looks like 2030 onwards, like just in 10 years?
It's changing. We see the shift to renewable energy. Oil and gas companies, large conglomerates, they are looking deeply at renewable energies, not only for greenwashing. There are a real willingness to invest to develop projects. So they set up ambitious targets, milestones, also in gigawatt scale their portfolio. So we see that this is happening. Really not a question anymore. But then again, the future of energy will change from a region to another. As you can hear, I'm French. In Europe, the future of energy will be different from Asia. The capacity we have, but due to geographical reasons, to develop infrastructure, to interconnect those infrastructure between the countries, with North Africa, with Middle East, would be totally different than Southeast Asia, where the distance is larger, where you have a lot of sea between the countries. That is an important parameter, especially related to hydrogen, and we will talk about that later. We see also that the last couple of years made people more aware about the real cost of energy and electricity and how being dependent of a couple of countries for the supply could be problematic, or whether the supply chain is disturbed by a virus, a war, or whatever. So we see a stronger willingness for many countries to diversify their supply source of energy.
Yeah, Indonesia being on the equator, of course, there's a natural advantage for solar, but Indonesia also highly dispersed, the country, right? It's a huge one side to another, right? So what's your view on future of energy for Indonesia, which right now is mostly used to be coal, right? It has changed a bit, but still.
Yeah, and it's a very good example. It's a large country. The radiation is good. It's a developing countries. They have coal resources, gas resources also. When you are developing countries, what is your priority? To try to save the planet, or to reduce your cost of electricity as much as possible to make your industry competitive? It's also a political decision at the end of the day. I see that most of the countries who have coal resources, they use it. If you look at Germany, they didn't stop using coal. They still have coal power plants and a significant amount in their mix. If you look at Australia also, a lot of countries took off in terms of economy, accelerated their development because of affordable electricity, often driven by coal or gas resources. Unfortunately, we cannot change this parameter, except if developed countries are bringing money to Indonesia to help them to cover the gap between the cost of coal and renewable energies. But that being said, the dynamic in Indonesia is positive. The growth is also positive. The coal cannot supply whole electricity for the whole country, sometimes because of the geography and the development of supply chain. So we see that there is real room for renewable energies, solar and wind. I would say mainly solar in Indonesia. So I'm positive about the future, but I do think coal will still play a role in the electricity mix in the coming years. So this is a fact, and we need to find a way to be competitive with coal in the right areas of the grid, or with private sector can afford premium prices for electricity. Maybe data centers, maybe in other industries, and they can supply green electricity for IPPs.
Yeah, right now where the prices are globally, if you're building something new, renewable is much cheaper than coal, right? Taking the international price of coal, and eventually the carbon tax going to come directly or indirectly imposed globally. That I don't think we can avoid that. But when and how, that may be the issue. And it will be very difficult to find new money for coal. So the existing ones, of course, it takes a while to move away from coal. But globally, 70% of power was coming from coal. But right now, I looked at recent figure, it's below 50% now. So shift is happening.
Shift is happening. It will be driven by the market in a direct or indirect manner, through carbon tax, for example. So it's quite positive, and we see that this shift is happening also in Indonesia.
And then you are an expert also on hydrogen, right? So what's your view of hydrogen? How it has developed? What sort of projects have been approved? Because the criticism I hear is that, yes, there are a lot of hype about hydrogen on both sides, but not much dollar has actually gone in, because to make hydrogen viable, electricity, solar input price needs to be below half a cent, which has not happened yet. Maybe in Saudi Arabia, maybe below 1 cent, but globally that has not come yet. So what's your view on that?
It's a good question, and the answer can be very broad. Hydrogen is coming. Most oil and gas companies are seriously looking at hydrogen. They see that this is the oil of the future. We see in the news, and if we want to decarbonize as many sectors as possible, heavy mobility, power, heat, hydrogen will play hero. And on the long term, we can duplicate the sort of market in a more dynamic way that use LNG with areas where we will produce green hydrogen in a competitive manner. And we will be able to supply it and transport overseas and so on. So that day will come. Green hydrogen will be a commodity. When, I don't know, we can be very optimistic and say it will be 5 to 10 years. We can be pessimistic and say it will take longer. 10 to 20 years, I don't know, but really it's a question of time. It's happening now. The difficulty is related to what you mentioned, is everyone is referring to the target of $2 per kilo. We don't know if it is at the production side, consumption side, related to what sector, but this is the target that everyone is referring to. Green hydrogen, where at that price, that would be amazing. We could decarbonize almost any application. However, we are not at that price today. And I think it will take a while before we can be at $2 per kilo, maybe except unique conditions with massive resources of sun combined to wind. So maybe the industry can be more pragmatic and try to, a bit related to the scale also we mentioned earlier. Depending of the context, we can define where green hydrogen can be affordable today, tomorrow, after tomorrow, and to strategize and define a timeline for the development of green hydrogen, depending again of the context, the price. And there are applications where, despite the cost, green hydrogen can be affordable today. Heavy mobility, for example, when you look at train sector, there are many lines which are not electrified, where the locomotives are using diesel engines, and where the electricity cannot electrify for economical reason or logistic reason, topography reason, whatever. In Europe, for example, as an average, 50% of the lines are not electrified. While I believe the geography is much more friendly in Europe than in Asia. And that is an opportunity for green hydrogen. Same with power sector. When you look at island grids, grid edges issues, we see that the utilities have difficulties to increase the electricity access. There could be a role for green hydrogen to integrate a maximum amount of renewable energies.
How is that going to happen? When you say to maximize renewable energy, you're using green hydrogen as a source of energy?
Yeah, basically we would oversize the PV plant or wind farm and use what is very intermittent to feed the batteries, but also electrolyzer. Then we store hydrogen, and when we need power for whole night or a couple of days, we can use the green hydrogen as a source of electricity.
Source of electricity means you have to burn green hydrogen to produce steam, to run a turbine to get electricity, or how you're going to get it?
In the case of HDF, when we look at such projects, we will manufacture the green hydrogen with electrolyzer, NPV or electrolyzer. We store the hydrogen in tanks. When we need to convert the hydrogen into electricity, we will use a fuel cell. There is a chemical reaction, no combustion involved, and the fuel cell will deliver electricity to the grid or to the off-taker, which can be a plant, a data center, whatever.
Because right now, if you do that, taking, say, solar price still averages about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. I think green hydrogen price, do you have any number how much it would be if it comes out? Maybe almost 50, 60 cents a kilowatt hour, no?
Alors, we try to look at a blended price, an average price, because at the end of the day, again, we oversize PV. It means we will have PV on the ground. So during that time, it doesn't make sense that we produce electricity from hydrogen. We will produce electricity from the PV and feed the grid directly. The cost of electricity generation we will have at night will be more expensive than at day.
But how much? Do you have any numbers?
The price will really depend on the scale, the irradiation, the availability of the plants. We try to look at higher availability, 80% minimum. In the areas we are targeting, island grids, for example, edge of the grid, those areas have a cost of electricity which is extremely expensive. It's often dependent of diesel genset. Cost of diesel genset is at least $30 per kilowatt hour. If it were that easy to have an alternative to diesel genset, we wouldn't see a gigawatt of diesel genset between Indonesia, Philippines, India, even in the French islands, and it's are big over there. We have also diesel genset. So this is kind of areas we are targeting, and why again to find a sustainable space in the market for green hydrogen, and that way use as a storage solution. We can make the project viable, and we don't sell green hydrogen in those projects. We only sell kilowatt hour.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you are competing with battery-based chemical storage, right? And that storage prices have come down amazingly. Lithium cell level is almost $50 a kilowatt hour now. And then you have a gravity storage, your sodium batteries coming in. It would be really interesting to see how hydrogen competes with that space, because you have electrolysis, storage, and hydrogen is quite flammable than anything else, right? It's very dangerous in that sense. Then you have to put into fuel cell and get the same electricity out. Now you can do that even with the gravity storage. Lift up a few tons of brick up and let it drop, right? And run a turbine or something. So it's quite amazing. Have you done any pilot already on this?
So we have a pilot on the fuel cell part in a refinery where they have a byproduct excess of hydrogen that we convert into electricity. In addition to that, on the French grid, we have a commercial scale project in construction. And it is a good example because we can show that such projects make sense. There is a tangible and viable business model for it. And secondly, they are bankable. So these projects we have in construction is in French Guiana. In terms of capex, is more than 150 million euro. We have commercial banks involved, like SMBC from Japan, BNP Paribas from France. So we can really demonstrate that with the bankable PPA, in specific context, condition, we can make a bankable green hydrogen projects the way I described. And we try to find a sweet spot for all solutions. There is no direct competition with PV plus batteries because the batteries, we use them in our projects. For peak hours, for example, we use the batteries. When we need fast answers for the grid, we do see synergies between the technology. The hydrogen can supply electricity on the long run, have a real added value compared to the batteries. But if there is a project where the requirement is to deliver storage for a couple of hours, we would use batteries only. The hydrogen wouldn't be involved. We have these projects in France under construction, and then we are duplicating these projects worldwide. Mexico, Barbados, Namibia, Indonesia, Philippines. Those are countries where we are well advanced in our development.
That's amazing that you are doing a lot of scaling up. But this 150 million project, when it will be online, which year?
We are targeting 2026 as a conservative deadline.
It's
In
a
the
big
meantime, we have the ambition to close other projects in several continents. So we can demonstrate soon that such scheme can be duplicated in different markets, countries. And in every country, we are trying to address unique issues from the green through hydrogen.
Now, when you say you are going as an EPC developer, right?
We are going as project developer, IPP, with equity partners. For example, in French Guiana, we join forces with infrastructure funds from France, but with a global presence. But we are not EPC. For the project to be backable, we need to rely on a third-party EPC, and for the EPC, the typical project finance scheme. So the EPC part is not driven by HDF, but by an EPC who has experience on hydrogen and renewable energies.
Okay, so for this $150 million project, which is coming online in 2026, which is not far away, what will be the outputs of this project?
In terms of scale, we are delivering to the grid 10 megawatts a day and 3 megawatts at night as a high availability.
10 megawatt capacity, right?
Yes. And our philosophy is to focus on firm and stable power. So it means on the ground, we will have much more installed. But what we deliver to the grid is 10 megawatt a day, 3 megawatt a night.
And how many megawatt at night? Only 3. And that's $150 million.
Yes, roughly. This is the first of its kind. That explains the price, but it remains affordable related to the context.
Yeah, absolutely. So it must have been financed by government grants, right?
No, we don't have dependency to the grants for such projects. When you compare to how the cost of electricity is made today, it's very expensive. The price perception is really driven by the context.
No, but 10 megawatt and 3 megawatt at night, that's maybe 10 megawatt for 10 hours will be 100 megawatt hour. And maybe maximum we are producing 150 megawatt hours. 150 megawatt hour price is about not much.
The discussion on price is very tricky because we are not talking about an area where you can connect to the grid a massive PV plants at a very cheap price. It is an area where you need to have stable electricity, where the grid is already unstable. We need to address those parameters, and for that, you need a certain amount of storage. It means in the PPA, we also have commitment in terms of availability and performance. So that explains the price at the end of the day. But for other projects, we expect and have the ambition to optimize that price. That's just a first reference.
No, this is amazing because you're talking about a real project. This is the first time I met someone who's actually working on a real hydrogen project, right? And that's coming online within a couple of years. That's quite extraordinary. And of course, it's a new technology. It's taking time, but I'm quite intrigued. Okay, I understand if it's done by French government, UK government, Australian government, Japanese government, there's a bit of R&D element, but convincing Indonesia or Philippines to invest in this, I'm not sure how does that work.
For me, it's really a question on what are the alternatives in the grids we are targeting if they are dependent of diesel genset.
Diesel, even in West Kalimantan, their official figure PLN was 38 cents a kilowatt hour, and I calculate maybe almost $1 a kilowatt hour because all the pilferage and all the wastage that happens, and it's a bad quality plant. With your number, this $150 million is going to cost you way more than that.
That was the first project. On the next project, we have the ambition to optimize strongly the cost, and it's a question also of sizing. There are many parameters which will be related to the cost. I do believe that when we bring savings to an utility and we make it comfortable on the grid stability, we should find solutions, whether to developed country, developing countries, whether it's Latin America or Asia. I don't say that the discussions are easy, but at least there are arguments we can focus on, which are tangible and make sense for everyone. Then we need to bring comfort on the technology, on the backability. We have this preference in French Guiana. Development banks are pretty supportive. It's also a way for us to bring a running on green hydrogen projects in developing countries. We know that it's complicated to make the first green hydrogen projects happen. not because of question of maturity, bankability of the technology, but often because a question of commercial scheme or business model. Who is my off-taker of hydrogen? At what price? For how long? Is the infrastructure ready? With our projects, which are very niche application, we are addressing all those topics because we don't sell the hydrogen, but we sell kilowatt hour. And in one project, we can have the key technologies you need to be strong tomorrow in the hydrogen economy, electrolyzer, storage, fuel cell. So this is what also makes our project interesting.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting project indeed. I don't know about the tariff in France, but your tariff will be well more than 30 euro cent, I would say. Australia is a 30 Australian cents. Philippines maybe 16, 17, 20 cents. Indonesia used to be below 5 cents, maybe 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So you cannot say the same technology and the value of lost load, how much value, it's very different in different countries, right?
No, I agree. That's why from a country to another, we will adjust the strategy, the scale, the target price, the way we structure the project. But again, some countries, the utilities will sell their electricity to the consumer at the same price all over the country. It doesn't mean that the cost of generation is the same all over the country. If the cost of generation is lower with our solution, they will have savings. So we need to be clever to find those areas. And this is what we have been working on now, at least the last 3-4 years in Indonesia.
Amazing. I think we need to have this conversation in 2 years' time. Once your pilot is finished, this is fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Just I'm intrigued a bit. When you put fuel cell and equalize, what you call to split the water, right? And everything else, you need a very different level of skills of engineering. What sort of people skills do you need to run these plants?
We are developer and investors. So on our side, we need a backable EPC who can commit on a price, a performance to guarantee. Experience on renewable energies, and most EPCs are comfortable with that.
No, but EPCs will be gone once the project is delivered. PLM has to operate, right? What skills?
We also ask the EPC to be involved in the O&M at least the first years. And then for any reason, either the contract on O&M with the EPC is short, or we want to take leadership on the O&M, whatever, we will set up an organization to be able to deploy the skills needed locally, at the regional level, at the national level. So the strategy on that will depend also from a country to another, the number of projects we expect, and so on. But the skills are not that high on daily basis. We do believe we can find, in terms of project management, a smooth organization between the skills we need to have in Jakarta and the ones at the very local level, which will manage the daily activity related to the site.
But managing a coal plant is very different from managing a fuel cell plant or an electrolyzer, right? It's a very different. Someone has to first understand the technology, right? So are you saying that the EPC will also do a build, own, operate contract for 5 years, or they will have a long-term support contract with a technical expert like yourself, because they won't be able to operate their own plant?
It will depend from a project to another. It will depend on the EPC background. What is certain that we will ask commitment for a certain number of years, but I cannot go in more details. Then also we can play a role, and we usually do want to play a role in the O&M. I mentioned that we are project developer, but we are also a manufacturer of the fuel cell. We have a manufacturing plant in France where we do megawatt scale fuel cell. So we have the skills. We can deploy that skills either on site in the capital of the countries. The power plants does not depend only on the fuel cell. There are other key components. So the strategy of O&M won't depend on the skills required for the fuel cell only, but we are very comfortable that the O&M can be handled in an efficient and smooth manner, even in remote areas. those technologies involve also redundancy. We don't need all skills to be present on site. There are things we can manage by distance.
I completely understand and agree at a project level. The reason I'm asking you, I did ADB's first solar project in 2001. So we are visiting remote Mongolia with a colleague from UK. He is a solar expert. And then we saw, I think, about 400 kilowatt solar installation installed by a Japanese EPC contractor, all instructions in Japanese, and it's not working. And when I went there and they were saying, can you help? So I had a technical expert. He went through, he said, it's too complicated. We don't know. And they said the next engineer schedule is in 3-4 months' time because it's a remote Mongolia. Of course, today the world has changed. 20 plus years later, solar is much more common. At those time, no one knew what the inverter was, what these things was. I'm talking about 2001. But universities have gone in, they have trained engineers as a solar engineer. That has happened, that capacity building, right? So when you are bringing in hydrogen, when it becomes commercially viable, someone has to work, Asian development banks of the world, the government's education department of the world, to do curriculum into the university so that they have engineers in pipelines, right? Because otherwise European engineers or Japanese engineers who are producing, they cannot run the whole world.
Something also to have in mind is I think there is a big difference whether we do pilot projects where a company is supplying a technology, install and leaving the site forever, and an IPP scheme where the company will develop, finance, and operate the project for 25 years. And when it involves a project finance scheme, there are commitments on the performance, and the investors is also putting its own money at risk. So I do believe that it is impacting drastically the O&M strategy, capability, willingness to find solutions, depending whether we are a pilot scheme or an IPP scheme. I do believe that when we are an IPP, we are investing our own money on a project. It means that we can demonstrate to the members that the technology works today and will work tomorrow and after tomorrow, and that we define the right O&M plan to make it work for 20 or 25 years. But when it's a pilot and you get subsidies to finance the small pilot and the performance on how the pilot will be operated, when it doesn't work, it involves additional costs that no one maybe wants to cover. That could be
very exciting. My God, you may be the most knowledgeable person I found that who's actually working in a real project. What else you do for fun? Do you cook? Indonesia is such an amazing country. If you're living there.
Yeah, it's a lot to visit in Indonesia. First, when you have free time, you can take the train or the plane and visit Java or all the mini islands over there. So that I try to enjoy as much as possible. And yeah, cooking, doing sports, cultural activities, even though there is not a lot of options. Well, Jakarta on that matter, but the quality of life is good despite the scale of the city and the level of pollution. There are many positive sides. And Indonesian people are lovely, so it makes life enjoyable here.
Many years ago, I think 2007, I did a Java Bali distribution efficiency project. It was about 150 million investment. I did travel the whole Java island, Surabaya, Semarang, and also we had a component in Bali. So it is quite a large country, even the Java main island. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I believe in Europe, if you do a survey around Indonesia, but a lot of people will think that Bali is a country. Very few people know how large it can be between Sumatra to Papua, 3 times around hours of flight. So that also explains the challenges that PLM is facing to develop a grid and the challenges for the country to develop infrastructure. And it's quite interesting. How do you provide access to electricity, education, healthcare equally from Jakarta to Kalimantan and Papua? It's really interesting.
So are you also working on standalone large solar project in Indonesia?
No, On our side, we really focus on hydrogen projects. So we are versatile about hydrogen, but we need hydrogen to be involved in a project for us to do it. So we can work on heavy mobility, hydrogen production, power application. In France, we even work on underground storage of hydrogen, but we don't like to do renewable energies only, standalone PV or wind. Why? Because we want to bring added value and differentiation in the market. I believe there are many people who knows how to develop a standalone PV plant, whether international player or local players. They don't need us to find new ideas on how to develop a PV plant in a clever way. Developing a PV plant or wind farm with firm and stable power through hydrogen would be a leverage of differentiation.
You are doing mostly solar PV, but not doing solar thermal. CCS is not looked into at all, right?
Yeah, no, we don't. PV, wind.
CSP, concentrated solar power. Yeah.
No, we don't have experience in that.
When do you think we can see the first hydrogen project in Indonesia? What sort of time frame?
We target to start construction next year and consider less than 2 years of construction.
How big is the project in terms of money, in terms of megawatt?
In terms of megawatt, 10 megawatt a day, 1.5 megawatt a night on the island of Sumba. We are developing a pipeline in eastern Indonesia. We have a team deployed. So it's quite big.
And these projects will be commercially financed or PLN financing as an R&D project?
No, it's a project finance scheme. HDF has an IPP. Equity partners can be local, international, PLN also. They have the willingness to be involved as IPP in projects. But that is a typical project finance scheme where most likely we will have a blended finance, key role from development institution, but commercial banks can be involved also.
If it's an IPP, what sort of PPA price are you looking at range?
I cannot disclose the number, but the PPA price, which makes PLN happy and is high enough for the sponsors to have a decent return. So the balance can be found. Again, we need to be clever. Trying to compete with coal power plants may be difficult today. Tomorrow, after tomorrow, be different. Once PLN will have more difficulties to access international finance to develop power plants. And we see that the shift is happening again. They say that they stop the development of new coal plants. So this is promising, but we try to focus on areas where the potential of coal is more limited.
Amazing, because I was involved in the negotiating the West Kalimantan Sarawak transmission line, where PLN importing from Sarawak on the Borneo Island. So I think that was about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That took a long time to negotiate and it was easy project to do because they were avoiding diesel, 8 to 65 cents a kilowatt hour. So 10 cents is a no-brainer. But in your case, the PPA price must be quite high to make it viable. Thank you so much. I really learned quite a lot from this discussion. Anything else you want to highlight?
But thank you again for the invitation. On my side, I would like to underline that the price of electricity is not cheap. It can be considered as expensive. However, we need to contextualize it. When we look at the alternatives that the utilities have in the region we target, they have a cost of electricity generation higher than what we propose. And we are very active in Asia, not only in Indonesia. We are present in 7 countries, mainly ASEAN, but also India and Japan. We are extremely positive about the potential of hydrogen. The world is changing. The hydrogen economy is happening. It's just a question of time. We believe that the power angle is a clever way to make the first projects happen. So that could be a short-term learning course for the utilities, the government, the development banks, the whole sector. We are extremely ambitious, and we plan to accelerate our development next year in several countries of Asia.
So you wanted to explain a little bit more on the details of the deal, or maybe let's go through that quickly.
we understand that the perception of Indonesia is challenging, the scale, the profile of PLN, the agility of PLN. But I'd like to underline that we met positive milestones and we see that PLN can be a utility with open minds and open to new technology and solutions to decarbonize Eastern Indonesia. Last year, we met a couple of very strong milestones which involved PLN President Padano. The last one was in December, the COP in Dubai. We signed a joint development studies agreement. It's symbolic in a way that this is a MOU, this is not a PPA indeed. However, this milestone is extremely important for HDF. It sends a positive signal to the market. And that day, PLN signed two other agreements. HDF Energy is a much modest scale, and we were able to sign that partnership with PLN presidents during the COP. So we see that progress out there, and PLN is pragmatic and looks at your solution.
Thank you for giving that extra explanation. Thank you.
I do believe that hydrogen has massive potential, but the key issue on the very short term is the cost of hydrogen. Everyone is focusing on the $2 per kilo target. So they want to wait for hydrogen to be at $2 per kilo. What projects are affordable? Who should cover the cost between $2 and $X per kilo? I believe some developed countries may take leadership on that. Japan, Singapore, Europe, US. Meantime, we need to propose solutions to developing countries and to find also a context where hydrogen is affordable and sustainable today, and the power angle can be among the solution.
Yes, and like any technology, entry cost is much higher, and then eventually, as the volume picks up, the costs come down.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We keep in touch and we'll see how it goes in 2 years. Thank you again for the invitation.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.